Earlier today, Starfield got its biggest update ever, this being about 25 gigabytes on consoles, but much smaller at just 1 gigabyte on PC. This update is easily the largest so far, both in terms of content added, but also in the likelihood to get you playing again, as some of the changes brought by this one are genuinely interesting and can have some pretty big impacts on gameplay. But also make sure to stick around to the end of this video, because I think for a lot of you, you're going to be reinstalling Starfield very soon. The most notable of the new features will be for console users, as you'll finally be able to play Starfield at 60 FPS on the Xbox Series X. Sadly, the Series S didn't receive any of these new features, but now in Starfield, you'll have the option to select both an FPS target and whether performance or visuals should be the priority. On most displays out there, you'll be able to select either a 30 or 60 FPS option, but on a variable refresh rate display that is also running at 120 Hz, you can select 40 or even an uncapped FPS for the game. Switching between visuals or performance will obviously tune up or tune down the game. You can definitely notice these differences in some distant details around the world and on the map, but also sometimes in reflections. But regardless of whether you pick the visual or the performance mode, both of these will dynamically tune down your resolution as the game gets more intensive. So on one hand, there's going to be more or less detail depending if you're on visual or performance, but also as you play, the game will be dynamically going up or down in resolution to try and hit 30 or 60 FPS. Obviously, it'll happen most often with 60 FPS as it tries to get you to that target. And I'm sure for the vast majority of you that care about this mode, you just want to hit 60 FPS with Starfield, and thankfully you can do this pretty consistently with the performance mode. The overwhelming majority of the time, this game ran at a rock-solid 60 FPS as I was playing. It wasn't perfect. Occasionally you would get a minor dip or stutter here or there, especially as a lot was going on or if you're loading into a new area. And conversely, when playing with a visuals priority, you would still be able to hit 60 FPS in a lot of places, particularly if you're in a smaller interior location, you still comfortably hit 60 FPS even on visuals. But when it came to some of the open areas, and especially when combat began, you could definitely feel the game slip under 60 FPS here. So if you're really just trying to play Starfield at 60 FPS, you will need to be on the performance mode, although there is going to be one major exception for when you won't hit 60 FPS, and not even close. The two major cities of New Atlantis and Aquila City will not run at 60 FPS. Immediately upon landing here, you'll feel major FPS drops. And one of the interesting things I noticed is performance here is actually pretty similar, regardless of whether you're on the performance or the visuals mode. New Atlantis and Aquila City are very CPU bound, so just tuning down the visuals isn't making a huge difference in your overall performance. And it felt like on both performance and visuals mode, I was getting around 40 FPS at points, which of course is quite the downgrade compared to playing at 60, and you definitely feel this contrast. The 40 FPS mode does provide a nice alternative if you can stomach 40 FPS. For me, it just feels so much worse after 60. And the uncapped mode is a pretty interesting inclusion. In some interiors, you are definitely getting a ton of FPS in Starfield. I was well above 60 and it really felt like I was at 80 to 90 FPS. But the only time you're going to get FPS that high are in some of these smaller and very constrained interiors where there just isn't a lot going on. The second action begins or you step out into the broad world, you're going to basically be at 60 FPS once again, even on this uncapped mode. So while I'm glad they just included the uncapped mode, because why not? More options is always better. Unless the game gets a bunch of additional performance improvements in the future, this one doesn't really make a huge difference and it's still going to play very similar to just having a 60 FPS lock. Generally speaking, I think these new settings are a phenomenal new addition. You'll have far more choice as a user, and finally being able to play Starfield at 60 FPS most of the time is a massive upgrade. For me personally, 30 FPS is borderline unplayable. I've been playing at 100 plus FPS for the past decade on PC, but thankfully you still will have an option if it doesn't bother you as much. You can just switch to that 40 FPS visuals mode and have a pretty rock solid and great looking experience. The other highly publicized feature from this one were the new surface maps. Instead of these crude maps for some locations, now at every landable spot, you'll have a nicely generated 3D map of the surrounding area. And this will include all of the nearby points of interest that are randomly generated. The best versions of these maps will of course be at the major cities. You'll get this beautiful 3D rendition of the city, but to go along with this, Bethesda also added in a ton of new map markers for all of the major locations in that city. And when it comes to the Well and Neon Core, there are even secondary interior maps to make navigating those areas a bit easier. And while these new surface maps are gorgeous, I found that I'm not even really using them all that often. Now that all of the major locations you'll want to head to have a map marker, I just found myself using the compass to navigate there, and then once I had that location discovered, I would just fast travel to it, which will significantly cut down on your travel time in many of of the major cities of Starfield. Although there is one very notable quirk around this, most of the newly fast travelable locations will place you just outside of that location, which in real terms, let's say you're on Aquila but want to get to your penthouse in New Atlantis. You'll need to travel to New Atlantis, go through the load screen there, and once you're landed, you'll be able to open the surface map. Then you can fast travel to your apartment. This will place you just outside of the apartment elevator, so then you run into the apartment elevator, ride it up to the top floor, this being a hidden load screen, and then finally you're in your apartment. So when it comes to navigation and finding where things are in some of the major cities, these surface maps are a massive new addition. It's really the new location markers that make this whole process a lot easier. But as far as actually getting to places quicker, this doesn't necessarily make the biggest difference, and if anything, actually increases the amount of load screens you'll see. I feel like a very easy way to upgrade this even further would just make it so you can fast travel to the interior of these locations. Like let's say here from Aquila, I could just fast travel to the interior of my apartment. That would actually cut out a ton of the process and be a really great upgrade. Unfortunately, right now, many of the interior locations, like shops you could find in major cities, won't let you open the surface map at all. So you'll have to exit that building first, then open the surface map to fast travel again. So overall, these new surface maps and map markers are a gigantic upgrade, but I think with just a couple of more tweaks, it could be an even better experience for many players. A variety of new configurable gameplay options were added in what is now a more in-depth difficulty menu for Starfield. The way this works is you can tune things up or down, and there's going to be a modifier for how much XP your character gains. And this includes many of the options you'd expect. Damage options around both ground and ship combat, but also the ability to edit how much damage an enemy deals to you, and separately, how much you deal to them. Included with this is a brand new extreme difficulty mode. This is harder than any of the previous available options, and with this enabled, the game becomes dramatically more difficult. In space combat, you'll die incredibly fast now, while in ground combat, your main weapon will become a pea shooter while every enemy is firing armor-piercing rounds against you. Not literally, but that's definitely how it feels with how much damage you're dealing compared to receiving. But thankfully, the beauty of these new gameplay options is you could tune this on the fly. For me, I really enjoyed having enemies take a lot of my health per shot, but I prefer dealing normal damage and not turning every single enemy into a bullet sponge. Beyond that, there's also going to be a variety of new survival settings. You can give ammo weight, make afflictions even more impactful and harder to cure, and of course, require your character to eat and drink, finally giving food a larger purpose in the game. There are a couple of options for this one. You can make it so eating and drinking will just give you a buff, but never give you a debuff if you don't do it, or have the typical survival mechanic, where you need to eat and drink to not get a debuffed character. Right now, this is a very simple implementation. Any drink or food item will temporarily remove the debuff and give you a new buff for 30 in-game minutes. So there's really no in-between. You either just ate and are now nourished, or you haven't eaten for 30 minutes and you're malnourished. And just consuming one item will dictate which status you're in. But what will likely end up becoming some of the most used of these features are all of the new quality of life additions. You can make it so vendors will have way more credits, so you can access your ship's inventory from anywhere, not just near the ship, or even so you have dramatically increased carry weight on your character. And considering this is a setting you can adjust on the fly, I imagine there's going to be quite a few of you that tune this up right as you become over-encumbered. These new gameplay options are probably going to be the most impactful aspect of this update, because it really does give you so much more control over how you play and enjoy Starfield. The build your own difficulty mode, I think, is a phenomenal addition to the game, and I hope we get even more extreme and additional options in the future. You can now decorate the interiors of your ships in Starfield. Once you're on board, you'll be able to enter into this new build menu and add new objects onto your ship. There's a quirk with this one where you can't actually edit any of the existing things on your ship, so you can place and move around this new chair, but I can't move that already placed chair that was added in by the hab module I chose. But thankfully Bethesda thought of this, so to go along with this, you're going to also have a variety of new empty habs that you can build for your ship. This will basically just be a gutted interior in the style of whatever the interior would be. So you can then freely decorate the interior of your ship however you wanted to, just like the exterior. And this does feel like a pretty phenomenal addition. I don't personally build too much in Starfield, it's definitely not my favorite aspect of Bethesda games, but for a lot of you out there, you're probably going to spend a dozen hours building ships in Starfield now because these new features can be very powerful, as well as there are several miscellaneous changes that actually do have a pretty big impact on gameplay. All the containers, and most notably those on board of ships, will now have tabs for the various item categories, as opposed to just being one large list of items. This makes item storage and organization far simpler and easier to navigate, and you could really just use one container now. There's a new setting to disable the dialogue camera, so instead of getting this zoomed in perspective, when you enter into dialogue, you'll just remain in the first person perspective. I really like this one. I feel like it does up the immersion factor as you're going through some of the quests. Unfortunately, as you enter into this one, you're locked in place. I can look around, but my character can't actually move. This is likely due to some kind of technical limitation by adding this feature in after the fact, but for me, I'm going to be keeping this feature on. I really like the way it functions, and I really do think it ups the immersion. And just in time for mods and a new playthrough, you also will now have the ability to alter your traits and appearance after going through the Unity and entering into New Game Plus. Being able to try out new traits for a new playthrough is really just a fantastic addition and will likely get many more players to go through the Unity as opposed to just starting a new character. Beyond that, a variety of stability and bug fixes were also included with this update, but overall I really think this is a fantastic update for Starfield. If you weren't already itching to jump back into Starfield, this may not be the update to get you to return to the game, but what I do think it is a really great step forward for the game, and I wouldn't be shocked if many of you are reinstalling in just a few weeks anyway. June 9th is the Xbox Game Showcase. Todd Howard has already confirmed that we'll be learning more about the first expansion at this event, but we'll also very likely be seeing and getting mod tools here. Over the last couple of months, Bethesda has been rapidly expanding their Verified Creators program. This is the new paid mod system for Skyrim that will also be coming to Starfield at a later date. So right now, there are dozens of modders with early access to the Starfield mod tools who have been able to create content for the game already. And what better a stage to unveil all of this than at the Xbox Showcase? I fully expect Starfield mods to be here in just a few weeks, and many modders have already been working on content for a while now. It's not entirely clear what the mix of free versus paid mods may be, but at the very least, you should expect something soon. But if you do want a full breakdown on what to expect from the Xbox Game Showcase for 2024, check out this video.